Hey guys, welcome to the Massive Iron Channel. I'm Steve Shaw. In this video, we're going to answer the question or ask the question: is speed work beneficial? Will it help you with your squats, bench, and deadlifts? Before I get into this topic, if you need coaching, check out the link down below. Coaching is what I do for a living. I would love to help. All right. So I'm joined by Mark Estrabio, Mr. Conjugate. Mark, can you introduce who you are and what your main focus is in the influencer world?
Absolutely. Hi there, everyone. My name is Mark Estrabio. I am a strongman coach. I'm actually affiliated with the Strongman Institute, so make sure to check us out as well. And I have a big emphasis on conjugate style training. However, my emphasis is not West Side conjugate, but looking at it from a different lens and understanding kind of, shall we say, more need for individual adaptation within the method.
So Mark is very strength focused, and I had spent a lot of time in the late 2000s and early 2010s messing around with a lot of strength related tools, and Speedwork is one of them. I would say back in the day, the late 2000s, when Westside kind of caught on like a brush fire and everybody was talking about it, all of a sudden everybody was trying speed work, and I don't see it as much during in this day and age, Mark. But the question is, if somebody's looking to build their squat, bench, or dead, and they're really obsessed with these lifts, the problem is this worth it? Is it a good time investment? Will it help build your squat, bench, or dead?
So it's one of those things where, in my experience of coaching, is speed work can definitely help. But truth be told, for most lifters, the time investment isn't worth it with speed work. And there's usually other things we would be better off developing. When I look at, say, conjugate training, which is obviously my big bias, I don't even call them dynamic effort days in my system. I look at them as developmental days. What attributes are we trying to develop to help the lifter get better? For example, if someone tends to dive bomb their bench over and over, doing light reps as fast as possible is only going to exacerbate the issue. Whereas spending some time on slow eccentrics, forcing them to learn control, that's going to help them control their bench and in turn improve their lift long term. It's one of those things where, if you will, we want to pick variations and movements that punish bad behavior or develop what's lacking.
Now, just as a general tool, I seem to remember there was some conversation that maybe initially Louis Simmons put some speed work in to allow his lifters to get in and do some work with the big lifts without it being as intense. Have you heard any information on that?
Yes, I've definitely heard that same thing. The idea being it just got them to flutter the brakes a little bit. And if you really think about the atmosphere of West Side at that time, too, even today, it's very high intensity. Those guys are competing with each other. If you haven't watched West Side versus the World, do yourself a favor and watch it. You really get a good idea of what's going on, underneath the veneer, if you will.
Now, when it comes to the squat, bench, or dead, do you think one of these would be a little bit higher on the food chain when you are considering speed work, meaning might be more valuable or might be more worth considering?
Absolutely. From my experience, of the three lifts, the one that benefits most from speed type work is the deadlift. And that's mainly because what does is it gives you more first repetitions. That way you can spend more time practicing your setup and dialing in your your starting position for the deadlift.
Now, Mark and I didn't, didn't compare notes before the video, but that's exactly what I was going to say. The deadlift is a lift. A lot of times on the first repetition of a set, you are going to see that is typically the sloppiest rep. And then when people kind of settle in, that second rep looks much better. Um, Doing speed work or lighter work in that kind of sense gives you an opportunity to just continually work on your form, continually work on that first rep, and doing so in an environment that isn't really taxing your central nervous system. The deadlift is known for taking more than it gives. And in this type of environment, it allows you to get in a little bit more training, a little bit more focus on the deadlift without the negatives. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely.
So, how about on the bench?
So with the bench, truthfully, I don't do a lot of speed work in the sense that we're doing things such as a lot of accommodating resistance, bands, or chains. Instead, I'll often have people do something where for 3 weeks we might do slow eccentrics to teach them how to control the bar coming down, then 3 weeks of pause work, and then 3 weeks of what you might consider speed work. But I'm sort of in the J.M. Blakely side of things where, what he said was every rep is speed work if you don't suck. When do we ever tell people to intentionally slow down the concentric
Right.
phase of a lift?
No, I'm 100%. No, I'm 100% with you there. I mean, when we talk about things like the dumbbell row, if you use power, people kind of get upset. But
Yeah.
you have to use power on the squat getting out of the hole. You have to use maximal power on bench getting out of the hole. All of it's power generation, right? Um, for me on the bench press, I don't feel it's always, and I'm not creating a general rule, but it's always the best time investment. With the bench press or with presses in general, I feel you recover really well. You can take them deeper without a lot of punishment, and this is individual dependent. And if I'm going to spend extra time on the bench, I'm probably going to use it on an assistance exercise like pause to teach, not dive bombing, which tends to drive me crazy, or just adding in a variation for the sake of, mixing things up and, trying to maybe fight weaknesses or etc.
Exactly. So, for example, if I have someone benching twice a week, 1 day a week we're going to be benching heavy. That's our pseudo max effort day. And we're picking a variation that hammers them where they're weakest. We specifically want variations that put them in a mechanically disadvantaged position and punish, issues with their bench. So, for example, let's say I've got someone who is very sloppy at the bottom of their bench and then also has a lacking lockout. In this situation, I might opt for something such as a pin press where they're pausing at the bottom against pins, and then maybe in this situation, I'll put chains on that bar to force them to work harder at lockout as well. And then on their secondary day, I'm going to train a little bit lighter, but I still want them to bench. And I want to think about where they're limited, which is the bottom phase of their bench. So I might have them do a Larson press instead for volume to teach them a lot of stability and control in the upper body, especially the upper back.
Now, I want to circle back to the deadlift because we had some good points here regarding the bench press. The deadlift, you could say, it probably wouldn't be a great investment of your time. Um, the question is this a good investment of your time, or should you be doing an assistance exercise on the deadlift? Now, with the deadlift, if you're doing a deadlift variation twice a week, like maybe deadlifting on a Monday and then on Thursday going in and like doing a stiff leg deadlift or a remaining deadlift or a deficit deadlift or a halting deadlift or whatever you're going to do, that can be a lot of intensity over the course of a week.
Yeah.
So I just want to get your opinion on this. I would rather see somebody maybe working on their hamstrings or maybe working on their quads or maybe working on their upper back, something else that would contribute to overall deadlift, uh, you know, deadlift potential or deadlift strength in the future. What are your thoughts on this?
Definitely, I'm inclined to agree. It's one of those things where I almost never have people deadlift twice a week. If they're more of a novice to early intermediate, I will. But after a certain point, it's just so much weight that it's draining. And it's like, what are we deadlifting for? If we're deadlifting for the sake of a bigger deadlift, then you could maybe make an argument for deadlifting twice a week. But if we're deadlifting for the sake of overall body development, I think 1 time a week is plenty, even for myself. I only deadlift 1 time a week right now. And then on my secondary deadlift adjacent training, it's going to be stuff like good mornings, bent over rows, back extensions. I want to pick lighter movements that generate, shall we say, less overall fatigue, but then specifically target individual weak links within the deadlift.
Now, Mark, let's move on to the squat, everyone's favorite form of torture. If you are in a home gym and you don't have a lot of leg variations, I could see investing some time in a secondary day working on your squat form, maybe doing speed work, something with chains, maybe you could toss on or whatever. What are your thoughts on speed work for squats?
I actually do like speed work for squats, but not even necessarily with accommodating resistance, but just as a means to get more work in. And something I'll often do if we're talking about squatting twice a week is if 1 day is our overload focus on squats, the second day I'm going to be doing something like pause squats, 1.5 rep squats, or maybe even something where we set a timer for X amount and they just need to get, Y total reps in within that time frame. We're going lighter and we're just focusing on improving positioning within the squat. Because if you just chase overload all the time and you're trying to build your legs, for example, eventually those squats, you're leaning forward, you're turning into a bit of good morning, and now you're not getting that same overload to your legs. Whereas something like a high bar pause squat, even though it's less loading, you're more likely to preferentially target your thighs, which is probably the reason you're squatting in the first place.
Now, I want to stress again that Mark and I did not compare notes prior to this. When I have a lifter do a secondary squat day, it's almost always pause squats. Now, there are cases where I have somebody very powerlifting focused, and we might do something a little bit more intense. But Mark and I are absolutely on the same sheet of music. You know, that secondary day, usually I do 2 or 3 sets of 6 on pause squats. I don't like to do higher reps on pause squats. I could see the potential for doing some speed work or some, something that would help you work on form that's not as physically taxing on the posterior chain. So, Mark, any other thoughts on these 3 lifts before I ask you one final question?
So ultimately, with all these 3 lifts, I think something worth mentioning too with the deadlift on your speed work is I think it's a really good option is to use some variations on your deadlift rather than just hammering the standard deadlift week in, week out. I really like to mix in stuff such as doing it with a snatch grip or adding in a deficit, just so you can change where you're training the deadlift and target specific weak links within it. Spend 3 weeks doing snatch grip deadlifts and then 3 weeks doing deficit deadlifts, for example. And then by the time you're back on your floor pull, you're going to feel that you have a lot more starting power off the ground. Plus, you'll be able to hold your position better thanks to your upper back being stronger.
Now, I want to end with this. In lifting, sometimes we see concepts and tools like speed work, and the average individual, most guys want to get big, but they also want to have a strength that matches their size. And there can sometimes just be this general advocacy of these tools, and people feel pressure. Do I need these? What is the big picture? I just want you to speak on this a little bit, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So I'm going to say it. I do think speed work is actually pretty overrated for most of us. Because in the big picture, we need to think about what our long term goals are. If you're just trying to get big and jacked, speed work, you don't see it in bodybuilding programs, candidly speaking. It's one of those things where, again, we're just going to say developmental work, our secondary, not overload chasing work. We want to develop attributes that allow us to push our overload work to a higher level. So if you're folding forward in the squat, you should be doing pause squats. If you're constantly shooting your hips up on the deadlift, you should probably be doing deficit or snatch grip deadlifts instead. We want to pick variations that allow us to correct our bad behavior. So then when we chase overload, we're actually hitting the right muscles. Rather than looking at individual tools in isolation, we want to think about a whole system of training.
Now, my final thoughts, Mark. I've spent a lot of time with speed work, probably a year or two. My final thoughts are for the average lifter, you have a limited amount of time each week. This is probably not the best investment with that time. With that said, we do phases of training. You have a 3, 4, 5 month block of training. If you want to work it in, get some personal experience. I highly, highly encourage that. Nothing replaces personal experience. In my experience in trying it, I did not find any value. I just feel like I wasted my time in the gym.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. And even for a lot of my athletes, the only speed work you'll really see in their programs is when I'm having them peak for a competition. And I'm doing it kind of Josh Bryant style, where they hit a heavy set for the day and then do some back off sets at a lighter load just to help reinforce good positioning as well as get a bit more volume on the exercise.
Thanks, Mark, for joining me. Let us know where they can find you on social media.
Absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram as Coach Mark Estrabio, and same thing on YouTube.
Thanks, Mark. Have a good rest of the week.
You as well, Steve. Thanks for having me.